Good afternoon, everybody. Jason here from Murideo. And on today's webinar, we are going to have Tyler Pruitt from Portrait Displays. We're going to go through the Calman calibration software and kind of give you guys a introduction or a tutorial, if you will, on the ins and outs of the software, where things are located, how to navigate through the menus, how to do different workflows and things like that. This particular tutorial today is going to be for folks who maybe are brand new to calibration or brand new to Calman. And I think the idea that we're going to do here is we're going to do a series of these. So this will be sort of an introduction to Calman. We'll talk a little bit about some calibration and give you guys sort of the ins and the outs of this particular software package. We'll show you how to connect a meter, connect a generator, again, go through the menus, the different workflows, and just show you all the great features that Calman has to offer as a software package. As the series of these videos continue, we'll go a little deeper and we'll post up some dates and times for some future sessions that we'll be able to dig a little deeper into the Calman software. For today's tutorial, I do have a special guest with us today, Tyler Pruitt from Portrait Displays. Tyler, can you hear me? Is everything good on your end?
Yep.
All right.
Loud and clear.
Cool. And I can see you. Good. You're in front of your red wall there. That's awesome. I do have Nick from our marketing department here at Murideo. He's going to be watching the question box. So if you guys do have any questions throughout this tutorial today, feel free to type those questions in the question box. I'll be taking a look at them too, of course. So if you have any questions for me or Tyler specifically, feel free to type those questions into the question box. Nick will be fielding them and I'll be fielding them as well. And of course, towards the end of the webinar here, we'll leave some time at the very end for some questions that we may have not have answered throughout the webinar. This webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, and just in case we do go a little bit over, which is kind of easy to do, especially when we have this topic to talk about, this session will be recorded, guys, so if you can't stay the full hour, totally understand. No worries, we'll get this uploaded to YouTube so you guys can catch anything that you may have missed. So that being said, looks like we may already have a question coming in. Let me take a look here. Oh, Hartmut says, great to see you both. Nice to hear from you, Hartmut. Carlton, good afternoon. Oh, Carlton's in London. That's awesome. So yeah, it is afternoon time for you, Carlton. So thanks for joining. So Tyler, tell us a little bit about Portrait Displays and Calman and where this all came from, and how long have you been around? And let's give everybody a nice introduction to you.
I think I've been here for 6 years. I started in 2014. I was a Calman user for about 4 or 5 years before I started working for SpectraCal, now Portrait. My main role is as our technical evangelist. I work very close with our engineering and product management teams on new features, usability. I'm also our main liaison to Hollywood, so all of our post-production and production and VFX customers interface with me, so I can bring their ideas and requests and stuff from what they're doing back to our teams.
That's awesome. And you, like me, you were calibrating in the field, and I was kind of a similar story with Murideo and AV Pro. I was a customer turned employee. Sounds like that was kind of the same same with you with then SpectraCal, now Portrait Displays, right?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to bring somebody on board that already knows what calibration is and is excited and cares about it, right?
Yeah.
Especially with these small teams and stuff where getting buy-in is very important, so everybody's on the same page and everybody's excited about the product and it's not just a job.
Definitely. I just want to give a reminder to everybody who's tuning into the webinar today. Tyler and I are going to be going back and forth between our webcams, and we're going to be doing some screen sharing as well. There is something that you can do that's kind of cool with the screen sharing. I'll show you guys real quick. If I pull up a screen and share it over here, you're going to probably see, and Tyler, tell me, can you see the Calman screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, so if you guys notice on your screen right now, you probably have a slider bar, and that slider bar will let you adjust the size of the screen that you're looking at. So if you want to, on your end of things, if you want to see the screen a little bit bigger, you can use that slider bar and make the screen as big or as small as you want. Just a little tip there in case you guys are having problems seeing it. Maybe you're watching on a smartphone. Steve Kemp says hi. Hey, Steve, how you doing, man? Good. So guys, like I said, as we're going through the presentation today, feel free to type in any questions. If I don't see them, Nick will let me know. And again, we'll leave some time at the end for some questions as well. So really, Tyler, the point of today's tutorial is to show folks kind of the ins and outs of Calman, and to kind of get people familiar with the software and where things are located in the menu, how to connect a meter, how to connect a generator. For today's tutorial, behind me here, I have an LG 55C7 with a Klein K10 colorimeter, and I've also got a Murideo 6G generator that's going to be running all the test patterns for us. What I did before the session is I did something called a meter profile, so we're able to use the Klein with great accuracy. And as we get a little deeper into these tutorials, we'll get a little more into the profiling and why that's important and things like that. Again, this tutorial today is really designed to get people just to see Calman and see how easy it is to take measurements and things like that as well. So Tyler, with that being said, let me minimize my screen over here, and you can still see Calman, is that correct?
Yep.
Perfect, okay. So when you fire up the Calman software, this is really one of the very first things you see. So if I am using this software for the first time, where do you like to start?
Well, we have, I just wanted to, I'm not going to go through it. Can you give me control of the mouse?
Yes, give me a moment here, and boom, there you go.
Okay, so we have something called, if we go up here to this Calman button, we have something called an introduction workflow. And even if you don't have a Calman license, you can download the software and browse through the workflows, and especially the introduction workflows. And they kind of walk you through what all the buttons do. So if there's anything that we didn't cover in this video, I think that's a good place to start to just check out, you know, what all the menus do and stuff. But I think we'll cover most of that during the webinar today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the Calman introduction, it seems like is a good place to start for a beginner. And that's interesting. That's cool too. That in the tutorial or in the temporary license that you can download from the website, the simulated version, if you will, you can still go through and look at all the workflows and stuff. Correct?
Yeah, so if you just download the software and install it and don't have a license key, you can go through all the workflows and stuff. And you can actually connect to measurement devices to check if yours actually work with Calman and stuff, but you just can't take any measurements or actually control the hardware.
Right. Right. Cool. Good. So with that being said, let's go ahead and fire up that main Calman drop-down screen, upper left in red. And let's just kind of go through with everybody who's watching what all these different things do. When I normally am about to calibrate a display, from this main menu right here, I'll usually click start a calibration session and get the session going. But again, if you've never seen the software before, let's kind of go through and just show everybody what all those different options are.
Yeah, so it's
oh, you know what? Let me grab the mouse from you real quick because the
okay.
this popped up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is our start session thing. So you can either say start calibration session, then it will bring up that pop-up window that Jason just took away for a second. And that's where you would enter like your information and the customer's information. So if you are providing calibration as a service for people, for your clients, and you're not just calibrating your own displays, then a lot of the times you want to have the customer information stored in there so it can be generated onto the report at the end of the calibration that shows the before and after measurements.
Right.
And then you can actually go back. We have this customer database where you can search through. So say you want to see, hey, when was the last time this guy had I calibrated his display? You could search for his name or his facility or his company, and you could find the history. And you can actually open save sessions, and it will populate all the charts with all the data that was in there when you actually performed the previous calibration.
That's great too. The when you're done calibrating a display, one of the awesome things about Calman is you get this very, very detailed report at the end. It has all the before performance, all of the after performance, and a list of all the settings that you left the display in. So what I find this very handy is that, you know, if a customer calls up, you know, 6 months later and says, hey, I lost my settings, what do I do? It's very easy to go back in, dig up their report, and you know, go from there, whether you're going to recalibrate the TV or just put the old settings back in or whatever. But it's very, very easy to find old sessions if you save everything. It's a cool feature.
Yeah, so that is this find calibration session feature here.
Right.
Now, if you were just calibrating your own TV, or you just want to do some testing, or you're not needing to generate like enter the customer's information because you're not on a job that's you're going to deliver that. You can just go to open workflow template and just select which workflow you want to open without doing the start calibration session and entering all the information in. If you just want to quickly go in and measure the display, or you're in your own bedroom and you're trying to tweak your TV before you watch the latest season of Ozark or something, it has that ability to just jump right into a workflow. And a lot of people are like, what is a workflow? Calman, think of it as like a step-by-step process for calibrating a certain type of display. So if I go to our category of calibration here, currently we have the ISF workflow open, but we have ones for like display walls, computer monitors, 3D LUT calibration. Now, if you have the Ultimate license, you have the Netflix workflows. Now, I just want to make one thing clear, because this has been a confusing thing, is this is not for calibrating your TV to watch Netflix. We've actually partnered with Netflix, and they require their content partners to actually provide calibration reports at regular intervals to them, so they know their content is mastered on displays that have been properly calibrated. We also have this onset display one, which is interesting, where a lot of local news and stuff like that are switching away from green screens to like video walls.
Right.
And you'll see this on like Fox NFL Sunday. They have a huge video wall. There's also, I've seen a blooper of somebody actually smashing one with a football accidentally. But the idea is those have to be calibrated to match not D65, but what the lighting is that the cameras are white balanced to.
Sure.
Or else, like if you just calibrated it to D65 and the lighting is at 4600K, and then your cameras are balanced to 4600K, the monitor or the video wall would look insanely blue. So right. This onset display thing is supposed to be for matching any display that's going to be on camera with the white balance of what the lighting and the camera set to.
That's
and then we also
cool.
have manual calibration ones. We also have analysis workflows. If you're just trying to take measurements, it's not really designed for calibration per se. You can do it. It's just not a step-by-step guide. So right. We have this color match one, which is a validation one. We also have the HDR and SDR toolkits. And then we have this contrast ratio test one, which is very popular with projection installs and stuff like that.
We see in some cases too, like in commercial environments where like, you know, they'll require a specific contrast ratio. So like if you're in a corporate, you know, training room or something like that, and they require a certain contrast ratio for critical viewing or anything like that, that workflow is really helpful just to take some quick readings to generate and report the contrast ratios, right?
Yep.
Cool.
And then we also have a color volume analysis, and then we have display specific ones. And what is in this category is stuff that Calman can connect to and control programmatically. For example, LG TVs, Panasonic, Samsung, Sony TVs, planar video walls. We actually just added support for Dell's new UP2720Q kind of high-end graphics monitor, where we can talk directly to the monitor and upload lookup tables to it. And then we also, under the tools section, we have a special meter profiling workflow that assists you in this meter profiling concept that we can talk about in a little while.
Very cool.
Now, the next option here is save workflow template. So there's certain parameters, like certain chart options, that you can change, and then you can save the workflow with those new options saved as defaults. Right. So if you prefer to see an RGB balance as a bar graph instead of a line graph, then you can save the workflow with that setting in. So the next time you want to use it, it will be saved like that. Now, it's important that you save it with a new name, because every time we do a new update of Calman, we lay down new updated workflows. And if you've modified one of the built-in ones, if you don't save it with a new name, then it will get overwritten. But if you name it like Jason's SDR toolkit, then it will not be overwritten, and you will have. So that's an important thing with that menu.
So you can customize workflows that are already there. And then also, I believe with Ultimate, correct me if I'm wrong, you can, if you wanted to build your own workflow from scratch, you could do that too, right? If you wanted to.
Yes, so we have something called design mode if you have Calman Ultimate that allows you to customize workflows. You can take one page from one workflow and import it into another. You can
Very
start from
nice.
scratch. You can make a one-page workflow for one specific task. So it's super powerful, and it also allows you to build custom reports as well.
Oh,
And
good.
it allows somebody to just essentially make their own calibration tool for exactly how they like to work. We have people that have made special ones for factory calibrations of displays. We have ones that are people have made for QCing firmware updates at display manufacturers. A lot of the top calibrators have their own custom workflows because over the years they kind of have their own process and
Sure.
they want to have the exact steps that they want in the workflow. Plus, it allows them to throw their own branding images in the workflow as well to show, you know, show the customer that, hey, you're getting an exclusive kind of workflow. And sometimes people actually, do consulting work and build workflows for other people. So as long
Very
as
cool.
the other person has Calman Ultimate as well, they can open the custom workflow.
Very nice.
And then reports are similar. So we used to just show you a list of reports when you went to this option, but really reports are tied to a workflow because certain workflows have different set of pre and post calibration measurements and charts depending on who made the workflow or what the intended use case was. And what was happening is we had users that they would use the ISF workflow and try to open a different report or use the
Right.
ISF report with a different workflow. And sometimes there was some incompatibility. So now only all of the reports are there, but only the one that is compatible with your current workflow that's opened shows up. So
Sure.
it kind of prevents you from getting a negative experience with not having your data populate in a report.
Cool. Good.
Um, um, if you have a report open and then you close it and go back to Calman, it really doesn't close. It kind of goes in the background. So you can say current report and it'll switch back to report mode. And then, so that's what the current report option here is. Save report template is the same as save workflow template. So if you change something, now you can change minor things without having Calman Ultimate, like the chart types and stuff, like bar versus line graph and stuff like that. But you can't add new charts or remove them or replace the chart or move stuff around unless you have Calman Ultimate. But you can still change, like I said, the line graphs or the scaling of the charts and then
Sure.
save them in the report as your own. It could be like Jason's ISF report.
Yeah.
Um,
The
Also,
scaling of
if you want,
the, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say the scaling of the graphs, I personally changed that myself a lot. That's a good way to do
yeah,
it.
I think by default, a lot of them either have fixed or they're auto.
Right.
Um, and we'll talk about that more once we get to the graphs. Also, you can just print any page. If you want to just waste paper, you can just print all you want. But I recommend that's what the reports are for. That's why the reports are white, so they don't like burn a ton of your ink or toner
Sure. Yeah.
for printing. But if you're doing a tutorial or you're trying to print out documentation, you can just print and it will print the whole workflow page.
Nice.
Meter profiling can be accessed from here, or you can change color targets from here, but there's other ways in Calman that are usually
Sure.
preferred to do that. Now the licensing that's where you would enter your license ID and password or deactivate if you need to switch to a new machine or you got a new
Right.
machine.
This
One
that just happened to me actually. I just got this new laptop about a week or two ago, and I always try to remember to tell folks that if you switch laptops, make sure you deactivate the license on the old laptop before you reactivate it on the new laptop, because otherwise you'll have a conflict, right? And it won't
Yeah,
activate.
yeah, it'll just say like, oh, no
You
more
already
license
activated or something.
activations.
Yeah.
But if you've already gotten rid of the old one, it's not like you lose your license. You just have to contact us,
Sure.
and we have to reset it on our cloud server.
Cool.
The logging menu. So let me open this up. You might need to. Okay, I guess it just pops up. So if you ever have a problem with Calman or you get a crash somewhere and we ask you, hey, can you send us a log file? This is where they're located. Now, by default, we don't log very much because we don't want to fill up your SSD with a bunch of log text files of every single measurement you've ever taken. But what we would do is say, hey, go enable all these checkboxes and then do whatever you were doing again to try to replicate it. And if it happens again, then come back after, if Calman crashes or it locks up, reopen Calman, come in, and if you double click on this log file here, it will open up a text file right here.
Yeah, so it came up on my other screen. You want me to drag it over?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, let me drag it over real quick, and boom.
So it would have some information in here, and then you can just save it to your desktop and email it to us. So if you want to close that out.
Sure, grab that.
And a new one will be created each day. So that's what this is like. Hey, it's April 10th, 2020 right here. So that each one is dated. So if you need to find one and you look in there, the name is by the date. And like I said, you just double click here and it will pop open that text file.
Cool, good,
so we can
easy.
close this now. So that's the logging. Hopefully you never have to use that.
I honestly, Tyler, in the years and years I've used Calman, and I can't recall a time I've ever had to use that, but it's there if you need it.
Yep. And then our about screen. So this would be another time where is if you contact support for any issue that you're having or questions, a lot of the times we'll ask you what version are you running. So if you click on the about screen, it'll pop up this picture, and we want this number here at the top, this 510.20.72 or 510.2.72, which equals Calman 2019 R3. Also, you can check for a newer version by clicking this. Now, it doesn't automatically download. It will just take you, it will say, yes, there's an update, and it will take you to our website to download. And then you can also just see our support email addresses right here as well.
Perfect.
So let me close this. Okay, so that's what we call the main Calman menu, which is kind of like a file menu. Now, let's talk about the rest of the interface. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is these three tabs up here. We call these the three tabs. It's like the three seashells or whatever.
Yeah.
But really, we call these our hardware tabs. So the one on the left is our measurement device. So that is our spectroradiometer or colorimeter. So in this case, Jason has his Klein K10A connected. And then the center one, let me just show, if you don't have something connected, what it will look like. So you can actually have multiple generators connected at once, but you can only have it display. So this is what it looks like before you connect a generator, and it's called our source tab. And what we mean by source is source of test patterns. So it could even be the built-in pattern window in Calman. So you can click this button and it pops up a window on your computer to measure stuff. So that is a little bit of that's what the source tab is. I'll talk about in detail in a second all the settings in the source tab. The tab on the right is, we call it our DDC menu, or the direct display control tab. And this is where, if you were going to be calibrating one of those displays that is supported in our direct display connection menu, or the device specific workflows, so like LG, Panasonic, Sony, Dell, there will be more ones coming very soon. That's where you would connect this. But if you're just doing a manual calibration where you're using the menu system in the display with the remote, then you don't actually connect to anything with this third tab.
Right.
Okay,
and
now that we've talked about
this LG we're working on right now is a 2017 model, so it's just 1 year too old to do the direct connect.
Yep. So now that I've kind of given an overview what these tabs are, let's go deep into each one. So for the I'll click on the Klein one, and
hey, real quick, Tyler, let's kill our webcams, that way that everyone can see these screens full screen. And there is a question that came in. Let me grab that real quick. Fabio asks, is the design add-on still free or only on the ultimate version? I think you said only on the ultimate version, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And Chris asks or says, would be cool to integrate a CRM if you have a large customer database where the customer's details and calibration report history are all stored inside of Calman. Chris, that's actually kind of the point when you, you know, if you were to go to open calibration session and type in a customer's name or phone number or email address, it'll pull up that customer's profile and you can see all the reports that you've ever generated for that customer. So that's already
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think
built
he's
in.
more. I think he's talking about some existing thing like Salesforce or something like
Oh,
that.
I see. I
Um,
see. I see.
and that's something where we are definitely thinking about. So that is on our radar. We're just trying to figure out if that's something that, um, or if that's something we want to do, and how would that actually happen. We don't
All
want to
right.
just throw something together. If we
Cool.
want to integrate with something like that, we want to make sure it's a great experience.
Sure. So yeah, let's go ahead and kill your webcam, and then everybody will be able to see the Calman screen nice and big.
Okay. Okay. So meter menu. So right here is where you can switch between multiple meters. This is our meter drop-down menu. So you have your i1 Pro 2 and your Klein K10A. So if you want to take measurements with one, you select it, and then if you want to switch to the other, you can select it. And you can have it's not like it's a limit of two. You could have multiple selected. Now here is where we have our meter mode. This is what the built-in meter profiles for the K10 have. One good thing about the K10 is you can actually use Klein's software called ChromaSurf to load your own meter profiles, and they actually are stored in the Klein. So if you have multiple laptops, or you have a facility where you have one meter and you have multiple people that have Calman licenses, you can actually store the profiles in the meter itself, and Calman will just recognize them, and you can store up to 100. I believe on like the colorimetry research, you can store 20. So that's kind of a cool feature. If you only have, a certain number of displays that you commonly calibrate, you could have a meter profile for each one. But if you have your own reference spectro, then the common practice is to do it for each display. But really, there's very minor differences between each of the same model. So if you have two LG C7 55 inches, you should be able to use the meter profile for both. I'll talk about more meter profiling a little bit later. And I want to talk about a new feature that's coming in Calman 2020 for meter profiling that I think people are going to be excited about.
Tyler, real quick, Fabio asks, are there any plans to store them? I think he means the profiles. Are there any plans to store the profiles directly via Calman in the future?
No, but we can. We don't have any current plans, but I can reach out to our partners like Colorimetry Research and Klein and see if they can make that available, because I think that would be an interesting feature for people. Because it, especially since like the ChromaSurf software and the Colorimetry Research software, it's not like they integrate with the Murideo pattern generator or the
Right.
VideoForge Pro or something.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a pain in the butt to run those profiles, because you have to like use the HDMI out of your laptop and things like that. And a lot of them don't actually, you might have a spectro that is not supported in one of their softwares. So you might have to manually type in each one, where it'd be nice if Calman could do it. So I'll definitely take that back to our team and see what we can do about that.
Cool.
So one thing about the Klein and some of the other meters, they have laser pointers or LED pointers that you can click this on and off. So if you are measuring something like a projector, you know exactly where your meter is measuring on the screen. It's not really a thing for flat panels, because most people put it very close. But if you're measuring a projector, then those pointers are helpful, and you could. Obviously, there's buttons on the device itself, but if you're sitting back from the meter and the meter's 10 feet in front of you, it's nice to be able to click it on and off with
I
this
use that a
checkbox right
lot.
here. Exposure mode. So you can, this varies between different meters, have different exposure modes. So you can do one reading, or you can average readings. Now, if you get stable readings with one reading, and you like, say you do a read continuous and you're just reading the same patch over and over and you get any stable readings, one sample's fine. But some display technologies are a little bit unstable, and I found that turning on the read averaging gets you more stable results and more consistent from one reading to the next on the same exact patch. It offers more stability, so that's what that's for. We also have this low light handler, and this is on most display or most measurement devices that we support. And the idea is that it's really hard to measure near black or black itself if you have something that isn't pure black, like an OLED. And sometimes it's better to take multiple readings near black for that same reason that I talked about for the normal exposure mode. But instead of having to do each reading multiple times throughout your whole calibration process, you can just do it for your measurement of black. So you could enable it and say, okay, under 1 candela per meter squared or nit, do 30 samples. So the very, very dark patches, you can say, take more readings.
Is the Klein, Fabio asks about the Klein, is it sensitive enough to where you maybe don't need that on the Klein specifically?
It depends on the display. I found that on certain displays that have very, like, especially HDR reference monitors, I have found that it was helpful.
Gotcha.
Okay, so then we have this is where our meter profiles are stored. So you have your C7 and C8 on here. We'll talk about meter profiling more later. So that's mostly what's in the meter tab. Now the generator tab, this will also be slightly different for each different manufacturer of the device. So the VideoForge Pro looks slightly different than the Murideo 6G. The quantum data stuff, they look different. So most of it is once you've learned how one behaves, it'll be obvious how the rest of them. But like, for the example, the VideoForge Pro, the color format is tied to the bit depth. So it'll say like RGB 8-bit instead of having two separate ones, whereas the Murideo has them defined separately. So those are the small usability differences, but overall this menu is pretty much the same in most generators. So the first option we have is this window size. And this is how big of a patch on the screen are we going to measure. So we have options from 10% all the way down to 1% and all the way back up to 100% of the screen. Now, for a lot of displays like LCDs, you can get away with 100%, mostly for SDR. Common practice for HDR is 10% windows. For OLED, I recommend 10% windows, where it's a box that's 10% area of the screen in the middle of the screen. And once we show Jason's TV behind him in a little while, we'll actually show it running through some measurements, and you'll see that. Now, we also have these constant APL ones where instead of just having black around our measurement patch, we actually vary the color of gray, or in some cases color, in the surround area to essentially put a constant load on the display. And this is very popular with plasma back in the day, because you'd want to put the same load on the power supply for each patch, no matter if you were measuring a black patch or a white patch. So we would vary the surround that's outside of the patch in order to, if we averaged all the pixels in each patch or from each measurement, they would equal the same. Even if we were measuring a black patch in the middle of the screen, it would make it brighter around it. Or if we were measuring a white patch in the middle of the screen, it would be darker around it. So if we averaged all the pixel levels, they would equal the same for each one.
So that way the TV is not freaking out, the power supply is not choking out and dimming the TV, right?
Yep. And then we have user defined. So if you set this to user defined, you can define your own pattern size in percentage and the APL in percentage. So if I set this to user defined, we would get an 18% area window with a surround of 18%. So if it was 100% white, there'd be a black surround. If it was black in the center, it would be almost 18% gray or whatever in the surround area. So this allows you to set, like, say you want your pattern size, I prefer 7%. You could just enter that right here and make it 7%. Now, you'll see these type of controls a lot in Calman, where I hover over it and you can see at both ends of here, there's a plus and minus. So I can go here and I can click this and it makes it 19 or 20, or go down like that. Or if you want to enter a known value, you can click right here and I can just say like 7, enter. And then instead of having to go click, 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 right? So you'll see these controls a lot, even for when we connect directly to a display. And you can, you know, use the controls at the end. But I found if you know exactly the value you want, you can just click and enter it with your keyboard. So I'm just going to change this back to window 10%. Oh, and even though these are still set there, unless this is set to user defined, these are not taken into account. So be aware of that. Now we go to resolution. Now these are depending on what is supported by the generator. So depending what generator you're connected to, there will be different values in here. Like for example, the Murideo 6G supports 3D, whereas the VideoForge Pro does not. So there will not be, you know, in the VideoForge Pro, you will not see the 3D ones that we just saw here, right here. I know there's a small but very enthusiastic contingent of home theater enthusiasts that are really into 3D, even though
for sure, yeah.
That they haven't made TVs in a while. A lot of projectors still support 3D, so it's still relevant today. Now, color format. This is, you can pick between RGB full, limited, YCBCR, 422, 4020, 444. I usually don't set it to auto because then it will just do whatever it says in the EDID of the display. I like to have more control over it, because especially with televisions, they don't. A lot of the times their EDID has been the same for 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It seems like computer monitors have more accurate EDIDs on what exactly they want. But TVs, a lot of the time, since a lot of source devices don't really, you know, they don't have to send what the preferred timing and stuff is.
Right.
But usually, some source devices, especially video ones and not computer-based ones, ignore that type of information. So I usually just try to force exactly what I want.
And really, Tyler, general practice, what we teach in ISF is you know, mimic the source as close as you can. So if the source is 1080p 24/444 8-bit, you'd have it set up just like you have it right now.
Exactly. And so that's one thing, like having analyzer functionality is good to have. So for example, you guys have the Murideo 6A that goes with the 6G, or the 7G has some analyzer functionality where you can go into it, if I'm not mistaken, where you can see what the default is sending it, and you can even like clone the EDID of your TV onto the device so it behaves exactly like your TV, and you can see what your TiVo is sending exactly on a color format. Because a lot of times they don't. TVs won't tell you what they're receiving. Some have hidden menus, some are better than others, but it's always good to be able to know what you're sending through your system. And then we have the bit depth one. So this has the option between 10, 12, 16 and auto. And then HDR. So if we wanted to turn HDR on the Murideo and VideoForge Pro and the upcoming 7G, once that's supported in Calman 2020, you can enable HDR10 and Dolby Vision. So one thing that people always ask me is like, how do I do HLG?
Oh, yeah.
And so if you enable HDR10 and then you change the EOTF to HLG, that's how you switch to HLG mode. Think of HLG as the same metadata as HDR10, except the EOTF flag is changed from the ST2084 to HLG, and then everything else is zeros. So the TV is just looking for the EOTF flag, and it's like, hey, I see it's HLG, so this is HLG, and it ignores all the zeros in the rest of the metadata. But it still sends the full size block that you would send for HDR10 that has other data. So let me change this back to ST2084. Also, let me mention this, as There's this HDR luminance gamma and SDR luminance range gamma. Nobody uses this. It was in the specification for ST2086, which is the static metadata specification from SMPTE, but it's not used in practice right now. So once we've enabled HDR10, it's putting out ST2084. We do have a default set of metadata here, and by default, we set it to 1,000 nits for the mastering display peak and max CLL. Now, one important thing to know is like P3 here and D65 and all of this, all of it is, it's not what your display is calibrated to. This is telling the TV how the content was mastered. So since, and you're saying how does the pattern generator have mastered content? Really, we are replicating the same type of metadata that's in an HDR piece of movie content or game with the pattern generator. So we're just sending the same type of data that a movie or a game would send. But the pattern generator allows us to send whatever values we want. So you could send some crazy different values that would never be in a piece of content, but is technically allowed in the specification. Well, the generator can send that, and you can see like, hey, what would the TV do if it had a max CLL of 2? I don't know.
It seems like if you were a QA or a manufacturer, maybe you might be doing some like really hardcore testing on the panel. But as far as like calibrating in the real world, I'd leave all these at their default position.
Yeah, so we've set them to the default of 1,000 and 0.005 for black level. And this is the most common mastering display setup, which is pretty much the Sony BVM X300 or even the new HX310 or the Flanders Scientific versions of the same panel. Also, the mastering display primary is P3, so you can flag it to other things, but I would say 99% of all HDR movies, the mastering display was set up for P3. Now, P3 is not a consumer color gamut. Technically, maybe that's not true for, your iPhone has a P3 gamut and it might embed those ICC profiles into its pictures and stuff. But as far as video, consumer video, P3 does not exist yet. Right. Now, there is some kind of rumblings like, hey, maybe we should add it. But currently, the only 2 color gamuts that you're going to see for most of your content you're watching is either going to be 2020 or 709. So why are we mastering a P3 in Hollywood? So a lot of the displays are set up as P3, and then it's a pretty easy linear algebra conversion to go from P3 gamut RGB values to 2020 values. All you're doing is changing the RGB values, but the actual physical color that those represent is the same. So you're just kind of taking a P3 gamut and putting it in a larger bucket, but you're not filling up the whole larger bucket. So you're not stretching anything out. You're just, transforming the data into the equivalent RGB values in 2020. So that some people get confused, but I would leave this to P3 until we start getting a bunch of content that goes outside of P3. Now, some people are mastering stuff like that, and definitely on the Spears and Munsell disc, the demo material was 100% mastered at 2020. Now, it wasn't pushed out all the way, but there is certain things like the quantum dot vials that go pretty much all the way out to the edge of 2020. So the mastering display primaries is definitely flagged as 2020 in that disc. So mastering display, all of these 4 pieces of metadata are in the movie fields, and the other ones are the content ones. So now that we went through the source tab, let's go to some actual workflow pages. So why don't you start going through, or we can go through the ISF workflow and talk about some of the charts.
Yeah, sure.
So this is the hardware connect page. You can just go up, and my preference personally is I just click up here and connect everything before I start. Some people prefer to do it in the workflow where you can connect your pattern generator and your meter in the workflow, but you don't have to. You can do either one. I just prefer to connect everything before I even open a workflow.
Tyler, I noticed too, a lot of times if, let's say we finish this session and I come back later this afternoon to calibrate this TV behind me, if I fire up Calman and all my pieces of hardware are still plugged in, a lot of times they'll auto connect, and I think there's a setting for that, right? You can turn off and on.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll go into the settings menu in a second. So everything that's like you need access to, but you probably won't be changing all the time, is in this gear wheel. So it brings out this side menu, and then there's 4 separate tabs up here. So one of those is the reconnect hardware devices, and you can actually pick, do you want to reconnect to a display, a source, pattern generator, or the meter? And some people, say you're a home user and you're only calibrating your own TV all the time, you can have it try to reconnect to the display as well. But by default, we leave that off because the professional calibrators are constantly going from different displays, and if it's trying to search for a display that is at a different customer's house, it just wastes time. So if we have enough time, I would love to go through all this stuff in the settings menu, but I think it's more important if we get to the charts right now.
Sure.
So let's go to next. So this is we're not going to walk you through, hey, now put your meter on. We're not doing a calibration tutorial per se. We just want to talk about the charts and kind of give people an introduction to that first. So I'm just going to skip past this. This is set up. This is where you would enter your picture mode and the color temperature, the defaults. These are all the pre-calibration settings. Now the notes one, it'll scroll if you have a bunch of notes and you want to say like, okay, this was set to this, and here was 20-point white balance controls and stuff like that. You can enter it in the notes field, and this will be populated onto the report. Next is our pre-calibration view. So there's a lot of stuff happening here. So we have an RGB balance chart that shows the balance of white, and this is a relative chart. So it just shows the white balance. It doesn't show any of the gamma of the display. Now we have our CIE diagram, which this is the 1931 chart. Then we have a gamut luminance chart, and then these are called our data fields. So this is our grayscale data, and then this is our color gamut data, and then this is a luminance curve. So in a second, we're going to actually populate everything. But first, I wanted to talk about some of the buttons and stuff in Calman here. So down in the bottom right here, we call these our action buttons because you click them and something happens. I guess that's why we call it that. So we've tried to make it as like universal as possible and not like had it written in English or something for Calman's a worldwide product. So like the stop button just stops any more readings. Now, most measurement devices, they have in their SDK, they have a take reading. They do not have a stop reading. So we can stop, but we cannot interrupt a measurement that's already happening because we have no way to control the meter and say, don't like stop halfway through your measurement if it's a long black reading or something. So the stop button just means take no more readings. If you're in a series of reads, it's like after this current reading stop, or if you're continuously reading, just say stop after the current reading. The play button means take a single reading, and it will be based on what patch is selected down here. I'll get over to this in a second. We call this our slider. The thing that kind of looks like an H, if you kind of put your nose up to the screen in Calman, you'll see it's actually brackets with like 3 dots. And that's what we came up with to represent take a series of readings. And usually the way this is configured, it will measure everything that this current workflow page is set up to read. So that's what that is. Now we have another button here. It's read continuous. It's actually grayed out because this page is not. You wouldn't want to use read continuous on this page. But that means just take the same reading over and over and over again. And when we get to the white balance page, we can show when that would be useful. So right now, I'm just going to say read series. Also, we have tool tips. So if you're unsure of a button and you hover over it for a second, it will tell you what it means. Read single, stop all, input, output, read series. It won't let you hover over that one because it's grayed out. But so if we click read series, it's going to measure Jason's TV, and it's going to go through
Tyler,
calibration measurements.
I think my TV was
Your
in like
lens cap.
a sleep or something because its first couple readings were
Okay.
kind of whacked. Yeah, hit it again.
Okay. I was like, did you leave the lens cap on the K10? That's a classic one.
I've gotten that phone call
Everybody.
before. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah. Well, I've done it myself.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, when it comes down to it, it's not taking a picture, and I just pretty much don't use the lens cap.
Yeah, right.
I just wrap it in like a cloth and throw it in my backpack.
Sure.
Okay, so our RGB balance chart here, let's talk about this. So if the white balance in our grayscale was perfectly the correct white point, all of these red, green, blue lines would be on top of each other right at 100. It would just be flat. So when the blue is higher than the other ones, that means in this particular measurement set, we have too much blue. And if we take blue out, then we would be closer to our correct white point. And kind of the opposite is happening with red and green, is they actually are below the line. Now, if we right click on this chart and go to properties, this is where you can start to customize things to how you like it. So we have different chart styles. You could click columns. Some people prefer this view, especially if you're going like, sometimes the line chart can be a little annoying if you're just trying to adjust 80. You're like, they like come to a point, they like come down, and it's so some people prefer column or even bar chart, which is like this. I think if you're going to use anything besides line, you'd probably use column. You can also change this axis. So by default, it's fixed, but you can also have it go auto. And if you go auto, it kind of zooms in. So it changes this Y axis. So before it was 120 to 80, and now it's kind of zoomed in. So, but the auto axis, you just have to be aware if it's on or not, because sometimes it will rescale the chart, and all of a sudden you think all of a sudden your calibration got worse, but really it just zoomed in on the chart. So be aware of that. And then you can actually set it if you're building your own workflow or changing it, and you have a preference, and say you wanted this to be 70 and this to be 130, you could set it up like that, and it would change the Y axis of the chart. So yeah, and if you uncheck title, it gets rid of the name of the chart and stuff like that. Now, you can also, RGB balance charts can either be relative or absolute. So this one is relative. And when it's in relative mode, it's only showing us the chromaticity error. It's only showing us how far the white point is off. It is not taking into account luminance. But if you change the chart to luminance or to absolute, it will, let me change this back to auto. It shows you, hey, here it's below what its luminance should be, and here it's above. So if we change this back to a line, you can kind of see better, oh, we have this kind of S curve shaped thing going on right now. Actually, I think the generator's in HDR mode. That's why it's so
Oh yeah,
weird.
there you go.
Okay, let me turn it off. Sorry, I left it on. I was like, why? Let's reread this now. Let's see. What did it read? Oh,
It's not.
it
It
read.
didn't hit that 100 for some reason.
Yeah. Let me read it again. Let me also talk about pattern delay. That's one thing I skipped over. So when Calman sends the signal to the test pattern generator, whatever it might be, there is some latency before it's rendered on the screen. Now, some of it could be the generator itself. Some of it can be the input lag in the TV, or whatever, you know, if you're going through an AV receiver or an HDMI splitter, or you know, an extender, like a fiber extender from down in the basement all the way up to a projector room or something. There's some latency. So we do not want the meter to try to take a measurement before the pattern's fully rendered on the screen. So we have this delay option. It's in seconds. We do have this optimize where it measures green and magenta, and then it slowly starts switching between green and magenta while lowering the pattern delay until it sees more green in the magenta than there should be, or more red or blue in the green than there should be. But you can always just set it to a default value. Really, it's not that big a deal if you have like a quarter-second difference, but if you're building a 3D LUT and you're taking 5,000 measurements, a quarter of a second adds up when you times it by 5,000. So you want it as close as possible or as low as possible, but if you're just doing a manual calibration, I usually have it set to 1 second, but you can lower it. Now, measurement devices that are very fast reading, for example, the Klein K10 or the Colorimetry Research CR100 or the Minolta CA310 or the CA410, those are much more sensitive to pattern delay because they are so fast at reading. And usually with like the C6 or the i1 Display Pro, or if you're just reading a Spectro, it's not as sensitive to it. So just be aware of that pattern delay situation. But usually if you set it to 1 second, you 99% of the time, you'll never have a problem with it. So that's pattern delay. Let me go back
Tyler,
to the,
if you hit that optimize button, Calman will run some tests and sort of pick the right value for you, right?
yeah, that's the whole thing where it reads magenta and green back and forth.
Right. Gotcha.
So we've shown the options in our RGB balance chart. We have options in like even the luminance chart. Right now it's in, I think it's in log mode, and it's scaled 0 to 1. So you can uncheck 0 to 1. You can have it auto axis, and you could just change this to exactly how you want it set up. So there is a lot of customizability, or you could change it to a bar chart. It would show you, hey, here's the luminance level at each one, or a column chart like that. So it's pretty flexible on how you want the data to be represented. Some people like a certain thing, and I think new users, we've picked defaults that most people would find acceptable. But as you get more and more involved in calibration, you will get your own preferences, just like people have their own preferences on what cars they drive or what shoes they wear and stuff. So, if you don't have shoes, any shoes are good, right? But once you start, wearing shoes your whole life, you might like a different kind. So that's what I kind of feel about the charts is we give you a good foundational configuration, but if you have preferences, it's completely customizable for how you like to work with calibration. Same thing for this gamut luminance chart. So let me get back to the slider situation here. So these are all the test patches that the Grayscale measured. So if I just click this one, it switches to that one on Jason's TV right now, so the 30% gray one. If I click this one, it will put up that one. Now, if I click read single, it will read that specific single patch. If I click this one and do read single, it will read that one. Now, on pages, and this is mostly on pre-calibration pages and post-calibration pages, you'll see that it has Grayscale data and color gamut data. Now, I only see Grayscale patches here, right? So, but if I click here on the CIE diagram or click here, it will switch to our gamut patches that were set up to measure. And if I click back to RGB balance, it switches back. So if you're on a page, you're like, hey, I want to measure this red again. If you just click here, then you can go pick red and take your measurement.
Tyler, excuse me 1 second. I'll be right back. Give me 5 seconds. Never mind. Got it. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next page then. Next one is, okay, we're going to measure our color temperature in gamma. So if I just do a read series, and a lot of these I'm just going to show a little bit because we're not walking through a calibration. So this is showing our color temperature. This is showing our average gamma. You can also change these to lines and stuff like that. These are data fields telling us what the actual correlated color temperature is. Let me go to the next step. This is where we can measure our color gamut and see which preset in our TV we should pick. Also, on a lot of these color gamut pages, if I click blue, we show you, okay, let me take a blue reading. Actually, this page is set up for read series, so we'll just do a read series.
So John had called out a moment ago that he thought that the TV was in wide color gamut, and it was before we realized the HDR was still on, so the colors are mapping much closer to 709 now.
Yep. Yeah, I just left HDR on. So,
Yeah, that's okay.
and this is completely uncalibrated. I think Jason just reset this TV.
Yeah, this particular TV actually has a brand new panel, and I haven't recalibrated it yet.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to call out is, say if I click on blue here, we show you a zoomed in version. So currently I think this is set up to just show the white point. So this is showing a zoomed in version of that. Now on a CMS page where we're actually calibrating the CMS, it will show a zoomed in version of any color. So this is another luminance chart. So if I hit read series, it will read through a series of patches, and it will show everything. And this is a luminance chart where we've separated out the red, green, and blue. So if I go to properties, you can see we've clicked. It has this breakout button selected. So if I uncheck that, it only shows the luminance of all of them combined. And if I check the breakout, then it separates out the colors. Also, when we have these type of buttons in the workflow, they actually trigger the brightness and contrast pattern of whatever pattern generator you have selected. So instead of having to go up to here and go down here and go, give me the brightness, if you just click this, it will bring up the brightness pattern. One other thing is this thing right here. I don't think we have, okay, we don't have an actual like, I don't know what we call it. It's just a way to bring out the specialty patterns. So by default, I think it defaults to the brightness pattern, but if you click this little flyout thing, it brings up everything that you would normally access from up in this menu down here. So it's just a quicker way to, instead of having to move your mouse all the way up here and then all the way down, and then all the way down there, you can just browse the different patterns here. So if I wanted to bring up the contrast pattern, I would just click that. Also is now if I go and click one of these, it just immediately goes to this patch, but it remembers what the last one was selected if I hover my mouse over. So if I want to jump between reading these and back to one pattern, I can just click this square again and it will bring up the contrast pattern again. Okay, so let's go to the next page. So this is our gamma setting. So now we have our read continuous button. So if I click this 50% patch and go read continuous, it will just read the patch over and over. And we actually have these little buttons next to it. I mean, these little flashing lights next to each device, and that tells you that it's actually doing something. Because like if you have like a spectradiometer and you're trying to read black with it, it can take like a minute or two to take a measurement. And this will continuously flash to let you know, hey, it's reading, the program is not frozen. Because some people, the first time they like try to read black with a Jetty or a colorimetry research or something, and it takes 2 minutes to read, they're like, Calman froze. I'm like, nope, it's still reading. And
Yeah.
this will be flashing to let you know. AutoCal. So if you're connected to a display that supports AutoCal of the grayscale and gamma, you can click this button and it will bring up a pop-up window saying, hey, what points do you want to read and stuff like that. We'll cover that in a later webinar. But so, like I said, if you hover over these, they tell you what they are. But the common use case for read continuous is if you want to read the same patch over and over and maybe make an adjustment in the TV while you're doing that continuous read. And then after you were done, you would hit stop. Okay, let's go to the next page. Color bars. So this would trigger the color and tint pattern in the Murideo by just clicking this button without having to go up to the menu. Next page. Sharpness. Same thing. We should probably add the sharpness button here, Jason.
Well, I
We could,
always talk when I always describe this page to people, I always talk about it like this. There's many different test patterns you can use to do geometry and sharpness. There's just 3 examples on the screen. So I
yeah,
always end up choosing, whichever pattern I'm going to use. If it's a projector, I might use multi-burst and geometry. If it's a flat panel, I might just use geometry. So on this page, I always just manually pick the test pattern I want.
gotcha. Yeah, and different pattern generators have different sharpness and burst things. So it's going to be different for different manufacturers. And the Murideo one is different than the VideoForge Pro one, but
Sure.
they are engineered to do the same thing. It's kind of like a different flavor of the same type of pattern.
That top one looks like an old DVDO, or am I mistaken?
I think this is the original VideoForge Classic one.
Ah, gotcha.
Okay. Okay, so Grayscale 2 points. So typically people do a read series here, and then we would do a white balance of this. Me personally, and maybe you have a different thing. I usually don't do read continuous. I like to do read series, make an adjustment, read series, make an adjustment, read series, make an adjustment. Now you can do read continuous. If you're ever doing HDR white balance 2-point manual, don't do read continuous because the panel will heat up, and like especially 100%, if you have 1,000 nit display or a 2,000 nit display, the panel just starts heating up. Or if you have an OLED, it definitely starts affecting the readings. If you just leave a super bright patch up in a continuous read, it's not a good idea, especially if you're doing a $30,000 reference monitor. I usually
Yeah.
just don't blast a Sony X300 like that. I'll just do read series, and it only puts it up for a split second to take the measurement. And then so if we do a read series, it reads the 80% patch and the 30% patch, and then it puts up a dark gray 15% full screen field, so you don't have to worry about any image retention or any problems like that.
Tyler, is
Um,
this a good time to take a quick look at the pattern insertion, or do you want to save that for a later session?
yeah, sure. So we have this functionality called pattern insertion, and I actually came up with this back in 2016 because on LG TVs they have image retention protection, where is if they think you're displaying a static image for a long time, they will slowly start to dim the screen to protect itself. So, if your kids pause it, their cartoons, and go into the other room, and you're in the office doing a webinar, uh, you don't have to worry about anything happening to the TV. But those algorithms, they work on APL changes and not specifically, the colors changing on the screen. So even if we are measuring just a 10% window in the screen, even though the colors are changing, the APL might not be changing enough, and the TV might slowly start to dim while you're taking your measurements. And it happens so slowly that you don't realize it, and you could be fighting against it. So I came up with this thing called pattern insertion, where I'll bring up the settings menu. So settings, and then it's under application preference measurement options. If you enable it, we can say, hey, every 45 seconds, insert a pattern for 5 seconds, full screen, and then we can select what level of brightness we want the pattern to be. And that kind of resets those algorithms. Now, for HDR, especially on OLED, you need pattern insertion not only for this dimming situation that I mentioned, but the panel, if you put up like the full brightness white, the panel will start to heat up, and it will start to shift towards green, and it will slightly get brighter over time, like 1 nit per second brighter and brighter and brighter, like up to like 25 or 30 nits brighter than just flicking the patch up and measuring it and turning it off. So if you're trying to do an automated calibration or even a manual calibration, you're fighting against this panel heat up issue. And most normal content doesn't have a 10% area of the screen 700 nits for 15 seconds straight or a minute straight. So it's important to have these inserted patterns to kind of either reset dimming algorithms or prevent heat buildup in the panel. Also is you can have it, so some people that are doing 3D lookup tables, they found that if they insert kind of like a 50% gray every so, on a pretty regular basis, they actually maintain a stable temperature of the panel over time, kind of like what an APL patch would do. But I've just found that the insertion is better. Now we do have some other ideas for making it dynamic pattern insertion and stuff like that for OLED TVs, but that's stuff we're working on.
One thing too, I want to call it real quick, Tyler, is if you do an auto cal, like on a 2018, 19, and now 20 LG, for example, when you're in those auto cal workflows, the very beginning of the workflow, they cue you, Calman cues you to go ahead and turn these things on, and it has some defaults in there that are already ready to rock. The end user or the calibrator just has to click, yes, turn it on.
Yeah, and one thing to remember is this, if you close Calman and this is enabled, it will stay enabled. These menu options are global. They're not like these application preferences and the workflow ones are tied to the workflow. These application ones are global. So if you change these, it will remember the next time you open Calman. And for all this, you don't need pattern insertion for all displays. So you can get into the situation where if you're doing it on a display that it's not necessary, you're just wasting time. So I recommend turning it off after you're done doing a display that requires it.
Hey, Tyler, let's take a quick feel. Everybody that's on the call, we're a little over an hour right now. I'm okay on time if you want to go a little bit longer. If you guys that are watching the webinar, if you guys want to go a little bit longer, maybe we can go for maybe 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we can save the rest for part 2. So if you guys feel free to type into the question box or the chat box there and let me know how you're feeling. And if we want to continue for a few more minutes, we can pick up with, we can find a good stopping point and then pick up with a part 2 maybe next week or something. I've got a couple people chiming in now and they're saying, sure, keep going. Okay to continue. So yeah, Tyler, let's go for maybe like another 15 more minutes. Sure. And we'll pick up on a part 2 once we do one maybe next week or the following. Yep. Fabio says, can we see what Tyler wanted to show for the newer meter profile?
Yes, I will 100% do that before the end of this.
And also, too, guys, I did see some other questions come in, and I'm not ignoring those. I just want to save those for the end of the webinar. And then Dimitri just asked, will it be recorded? Absolutely, guys. If you do need to jump off, I totally understand. Go ahead and jump off and do what you got to do. And this will be recorded, and you can catch up with anything that you missed for sure.
Okay, so we're now at our grayscale, gamma, and multi-point adjust page. So I'm going to do a read series, and then I'm going to talk about delta E formulas. And delta E charts.
Yeah, you and Catherine had a great SMPI conference. I watched that. It was very, very interesting. All the different things that go into delta formulas. It's crazy how deep that goes.
Yeah, so this is our delta E chart, and what delta E is it's a way to represent how much error is in your measurements compared to what the target was. Now we could look at the XY values and stuff like that, but the problem is, especially the 1931 XY color space is not perceptually uniform. So just because you're like 0.002 off here doesn't mean 0.002 off here is the same magnitude of error and the same visual difference. So delta E formulas try to represent one number to represent the amount of error, but it takes into account human perception and different areas and different colors. So for example, if we go to properties, and by default, most of the charts in Calman are delta E 2000. If we go to properties, we support a ton of different delta E formulas. 1976, 1994, 2000. As you can see, the color science community is very creative with their naming. They're like, what year is it? Okay, we'll call it that.
Let's just call it that, yeah.
Yeah, so historically, almost all of the delta E formulas are based on C lab or U prime, V prime, or stuff like that. The problem with these color spaces is they were designed mostly for reflective measurements and reflective stuff, like
So light
measuring
bouncing off
paint.
of something like an object
Yes,
and then
yes,
measured.
measuring paint or fabric, and they work, especially Delta E2000 works great for those industries. But displays are a different animal than paint reflecting, because the spectral response of paint is very broadband, even on, unless we're talking about like something phosphor based, or like a black light on something, then you can get some pretty weird spectra off of it. But the spectrum off of paint and fabrics is very broadband, and these existing Delta E formulas and color spaces are completely adequate for them. That's why it's not really a problem. Delta E2000 works great in most industries that need color science for accuracy. Like textile manufacturing. When Nike makes a new shoe, they design it on like an ASO monitor, and then they want to know that the fabric's going to look the same on their shoe in their manufacturing in Asia and stuff like that. And then they look at stuff in a light box with a known light source that's a broadband light source and stuff like that. So those industries, Delta E2000 works fine. Now displays, especially new wide gamut displays that has very narrow spectral peaks and stuff to make very saturated colors, Delta E2000 kind of breaks down. Also, Delta E2000, since it is based on CIE LAB or CLAB, the way CLAB works is it's a relative color space. So it assumes that the human observer is adapted to the white that you're feeding into it. But displays do not work like that. They're not in an environment where there's a light source. They create light. So if we have a really dark TV show, like say that infamous episode of Game of Thrones, the whole thing is dark pretty much. So your eye is not adapted to the white of the display, 100 nits or 1,000 nits or whatever. You have been adapted to some color that's dark in that scene. So CLAB always assumes that you are adapted to white. So the consequence of this is that it underreports errors that are in dark areas of the screen. And what you'll see if you're measuring displays near black is they can be really far off, but Delta E2000 will still say it's great. And that's the major problem with Delta E2000. And it's only compounded when we've gone to HDR, and now where are we supposed to peg the white to? The peak brightness of the display in HDR, 1,000 nits, then that really throws a wrench into the CLAB and the math behind Delta E2000. Are we adapted to 1,000 nits at all time? That you could have a movie that would never even show 1,000 nits. So why is our Delta E formula pegged to a measurement of the peak of the display? So Dolby did a bunch of research, and they used PQ or ST2084 curve and the ITP color space to come up with a new Delta E formula that used to be called Delta E ICTCP, but now it has been renamed to ITP, and it's been actually standardized by the ITU. So it's actually called BT2124 now. And the ITU is the International Telecommunications Union, and they are part of the EU, and they are the ones that set color space standards that are used for film or TV and video. They're the ones that did BT709 and BT2020 and BT2100, which kind of takes BT2020 and combines it with all the HDR standards. So they're the ones responsible for a lot of these standards. The other one is SMPTE. So SMPTE is kind of like some part of the standardization, and the ITU is the other part. But this new Delta E formula, since it's based on the PQ curve, it's not a relative color space. It's an absolute color space where if you're measuring a dark color, it assumes that you're adapted to that color. So as we can see, so these errors we're seeing, they're less than 4 in Delta E2000. Now, if I switch it to Delta ITP, some are less, but especially the ones down here further. And if we switch to more steps of gray, you'd probably see them higher. down here, because as you get near black, Delta E2000 would just say, oh, that's fine, and Delta ITP would say that that's an actual visible error. And I don't think it's a perfect Delta E formula. I think there's more research, especially at the edges of the color gamuts, like super saturated blues. I think there needs to be more human testing done, where we actually take humans and show them, have them do color matching with like sliders with very narrow spectral peaks in very saturated and bright colors, and do more human experiments, because we don't have data sets like that right now. There's been some small research, but there's not like an industry standard data set for calculating that stuff. We've been using a lot of older data sets for that type of testing. But so me personally, I think Delta ITP should be used for everything. Now, there is one consideration that you have to take into account, is you will see larger errors a lot of the times. And the problem is, we've been using Delta E2000 in 1994 for so long that a lot of people are accustomed to a certain magnitude of error. So there becomes these conventional wisdoms like, oh, under 3 is good, or under 1 and stuff like that. And we just kind of have to recalibrate what we consider a good calibration when we measure with ITP. And that's why I've been advocating to like have a transition period where if you want to show a customer ITP, show them Delta E2000 and ITP at the same time, so they can kind of understand. And I've actually been recommending this to journalists that use Calman to review TVs and monitors and stuff to do the same. I think it's important to have an educational transition period where we show both Delta E2000 and ITP at the same time, so people can understand the relationship between them. So if I switch back to Delta E2000 and we look at this 10% value, 10% gray, you can see how much smaller Delta E2000. Delta E2000 thinks it's 0.8, but ITP says it's like 2 and, hold on, let me hover over this, almost 3.
Tyler, have you ever done a test where you calibrate, you have two of the exact same monitor, you calibrate the left one with 2000, you calibrate the right one with ITP, and then visually look at some content? Like, have you done this? Can you see a difference?
Well, the most difference you're going to see is near black.
Right.
So the problem is, below like a couple nits, Delta E2000 says everything is great, even if you can plainly see visually that the shadows are red or green or something. That is the major issue. And Delta ITP might say that's a DE of 14,
Right.
where Delta E2000 says it's 1. And that's where you're going to see a major difference. Also, in very bright and saturated colors,
Right.
You'll see a difference there. But for like in this area, you might not see that much of a difference. Also, ITP might show a lower value than 2000 near white. You see that, how
Yeah.
for 2000 we're at 3.6. ITP says it's less. Is because humans were much more sensitive to chromaticity changes in darker colors. And this, I think, has something to do with, and I could talk to Catherine about this, but as the human visual system is kind of, it's not exactly a logarithmic function, but it's kind of like, as you get brighter, you have to make larger changes to visually notice the difference. It's like if I had 2 candles and I had like a diffuser in front of it and I added another one, you'd be able to see the difference. But if I had 100 candles and I added one, you wouldn't be able to see the difference. You'd have to add like 20 to see the difference. So I think the thing is, since Delta E2000 uses C-Lab, C-Lab assumes that you're adapted to white, so it kind of over-reports errors near white because it thinks you're perfectly adapted to that color. Whereas Delta ITP, it assumes you're adapted to whatever color. So you actually can see smaller values in SDR at 100% white, but you'll mostly see larger errors in other parts of the color space. Now, for Delta E2000, a lot of people would say, hey, you should have it under 3. TVs these days, you can get it, much closer than that. If you use a 3D lookup table, you might be able to get everything under 1 of Delta E2000.
Yeah, I see that a lot, actually.
Really, what the ITU is saying is if you're under 3 on ITP, you're pretty good. You're like within 1 or 2 J&Ds. And a lot of the times, a J&D is talking about colors that are right next to each other. So even if you had them separated a little bit on screen, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And I can actually show you, do we have in this workflow one of the color comparators? Let me show you this. I think this is a good feature. I can just, oh, you know what? On a delta E chart, it will show it. So let's populate this, and then I'll hover over the delta E chart. Okay, so see this color comparator thing that pops up when you hover over a delta E chart?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a delta E. Actually, if your TV wasn't close, you'll see, I guess I can't point it out, but there's an actual and a target line here. Now
I can actually
workflows,
see it on my monitor that
yeah,
I'm looking at. I can see that the top one and the bottom one are 2 different colors.
yeah. So actually, I'm just gonna open up our let me go to the color match because it has the full one, and it's large on screen. I think this is an important thing, and if you play with Calman, you have Calman yourself, you can test this yourself. Did I click? Okay, so it has this whole color comparator here. So I'm going to change this. So bear with me here. I don't want to have to take 100 measurements.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to read these, and this is a large color comparator. Now we have this option if you have this in the workflow, in a workflow page. Where you can see the difference when they're touching each other, right? So at least I can on my screen. I don't know how
Same
well it's
here.
coming over the stream, so
Yep.
bear with me. So I can see the difference in these 2 colors, and it's a Delta E2000 of 4. And if we change this to ITP, let's do that. It's more like 6. But I can see the difference of this. But if I right click on this and go to properties, there's this option called make contiguous. So if I uncheck that, and now they're just separated by like the size of a mouse cursor, it's much harder to tell the difference. And this is where the whole thing like, oh, this is a massive error. But if I'm looking at a screen and these are the 2 colors, like I can't tell the difference between these 2 right now. My brain is telling me that these are the same. Like maybe, they say women have better color vision than men. So maybe my wife would be able to see the difference. But for me, I can't tell the difference between these 2. So you have to kind of take things in context. Like we can make charts as pretty as possible, and I know everybody loves showing how much. I got my number smaller than yours, but that's good for research and everything. But at the end of the day, we're calibration. To us, it's fun and it's a hobby, but for most people, it's a maintenance task for their display. It's like getting their oil changed, right? So as long as you get in with a range that is acceptable of a level of accuracy for what they are doing. So for example, a video editor that is not doing final color on a movie doesn't need, probably doesn't need as accurate as a monitor as somebody doing final color grading or stuff like that. So that's important to remember. Also that the worst case scenario is when 2 colors touch each other. And if they don't, our brain, our brain is not our eyes, or the human visual system is not a measurement device. It is very fuzzy. That's why
And it's
I
adaptive.
always say that. Yeah, I always say that color science is it's half the physics of light and half human perception. Physics of light we've known for hundreds of years. It's very easy to quantify. If we just had to measure the physics of light, we could exactly match any display we wanted. But we're trying to measure something in a way that a human would see it, and that's where the fuzziness gets. And that's why there's no one perfect way to do everything, and that's why different display technologies can look different. It's called metamerism failure, where two different display technologies, you know, say one OLED, one LCD, calibrated to the exact same white point can look perceptually different. And I think we can talk about that more in a following a follow-up. So
Yeah, Tyler,
let's get,
Tyler, if you want to, let's wrap up with this part, do the profile part, and then we should be good for today.
Yep. Okay, so currently, if we open our meter profiling workflow,
I do have a if you want to do this live, I do have an i1 Pro 2 here. My Jetty's on its way back. It was just recalibrated. It's on its way back from Germany right now.
well, I'll
But I
just
do
show
have an
the
i1 Pro
options.
2
So,
here. Yeah.
yeah, I'll just show the option. So you normally do your reference meter, then you create your profile. This is actually your profile that you have selected here. So if I turned it off, there would be no profile in here. So in Calman 2020 Beta 1 that's coming out, we've added a new method of meter profiling specifically for RGB W OLED televisions. Now, LG put out a white paper last May at SID, which is the Society of Information Displays in San Francisco, on how to make a meter profile better for non RGB based displays, and specifically their RGB OLEDs or their WRGB OLEDs, where there's a white subpixel and then a red, green, and blue subpixel. Now, the issue is that if you measure the spectrum of an LG OLED, if you measure the spectrum of white on a normal display, the spectrum of white actually equals the spectrum of red, green, and blue all combined. Now on an LG OLED TV, and this also applies to Panasonic and Sony and whoever else is using the LG display panels, that is not true. The white subpixel has a different spectral response or spectral power distribution than red, green, and blue subpixels combined. So a normal meter profiling method does not give you as accurate as possible. So LG came up with a way where we take the same readings, we measure red, green, blue, and white, and then we calculate multiple matrix corrections depending on which subpixels are lit up. Because a lot of people don't know this, but if you look under with like a jeweler's loupe at an LG OLED TV or anybody using those panels, it only lights up 3 subpixels at a time, 1 white and 2 other colors. And they have some advanced algorithm LG Display does that goes from RGB to RGBW. And so we need a different matrix for the different combinations of those subpixels. So we create 3 matrices, and then we have we switch between them depending on what color we're measuring. And we're calling this the Bodner method because LG has a color scientist from RIT named Ben Bodner, and he did all the research on this. And we're the first software manufacturer that's implemented this. Other people have done other implementations or other strategies to combat the same problem, but we're the first that has actually implemented the LG method directly. So in the Calman 2020 beta that's coming out in like a week or two, you'll be able to do this new Bodner method. So you'll have a new drop down in here saying which method you would like to use. The default one, which is the normal 4-color matrix one, or the new Bodner method. So if you want to be able to get the absolute best results out of your meter profile on these specific TV panels, then I highly recommend you use this new method, and we've seen great results with it. Also, is if you are a Calman user already and you would like to be a part of this beta program, is if you go to portrait.com and scroll to the bottom of the page, there's a link down there. It's in like the footer of the website that says Calman beta program. And if you just enter your information, and you'll be added to the list, and then you'll receive the link to download the beta when it's available.
Hey, Tyler.
Yep.
Dave asks, relating to this specifically, how does this relate to calibrating a broadcast OLED monitor like a Sony? Are those are RGB, right? Not WRGB.
Yep. So this is only for LG Display RGBW OLED panels, not
Right.
for traditional RGB OLED like Sony and Flanders and Well, Sony makes all of those panels, which actually rest in peace because they're not making those anymore. But
Oh man.
yeah, hopefully somebody else steps up. Is there any other questions that you've flagged along the way that I can answer?
There was a few actually. So we'll go kind of through these one by one, and just to
Do
follow
you
up
want
on
to
that.
turn back on your webcam or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, let's do
People
that.
want to see you smile.
Yeah. Dave actually had a follow up to that question he just asked. He says, let me bring this out so I can actually see it. Questions. Dave says, how does that, oh, sorry. So it does not replace the jut offset.
No, so that's a different thing completely.
Yeah.
So that has to do with this concept of metamerism failure, where if we calibrate an RGB OLED to D65, it looks green. It does not look like D65
Right.
would on a plasma or a CRT or something. So Sony came up with an alternative white point that visually looks the same or as
Right.
close as possible. And so that became kind of the unofficial industry standard white point if you're doing an RGB OLED mastering display.
And that
So
it's more magenta, right? If I remember correctly, it's a little more
yeah,
purpley.
well, so yeah, so I would say that if and this is something that there's a big debate and discussion online about, like, hey, if you're doing a LG OLED panel or Sony with the same panel or Panasonic, what white point should you calibrate to? Because most people, including me, if I calibrate it to D65, it looks slightly magenta. So there's been people that have done perceptual matching to plasmas and stuff, and there's a big thread on AVS that has a lot of great information with different tests. I actually busted out one of our old PVM CRTs and did a perceptual match. So if you want your 2019 LG to look like a CRT, then I have a white point in there. But
Nice.
so also there's a white point that I've shared that is good for matching the RGB OLEDs that are calibrated to the alternative white point. So it's like the Sony's calibrated to alternative white point, and now we need a different one for the LG to visually look the same as the Sony. Because really in Hollywood, they use these OLED TVs as what they call a client monitor. So typically the artist sits at his console with his base light or resolve setup, and the director of photography or the producers, the directors, they sit on a couch looking at an OLED television, and it needs to visually look the same. It doesn't need to measure the same. It just needs to visually look the same, because you can't have like 5 people around a 30-inch monitor.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have like a really plush couch and all the nicest snacks and LaCroix and everything.
Yeah.
So they want to kick back and look at the image on a bigger screen.
That's funny. Let's see if there's any other questions that came in sort of in the middle. There was one real specific question that I probably would want to talk to him offline about. And that was, it had something to do with like an HD Fury or something. But yeah, that question, I think so we'll be here for another hour. So let's reach out to that gentleman
Sure.
offline. Fabio asked, is it recommended to use a low light handler for the K10? I think you said that depended on the display, right?
I have used it. Some people, I think it also depends on which software you're using. They have different configurations, but I've used it. We only have one K10 in the office, and so it's like we have so many different other meters. I don't use it all the time, but the last time I built a 3D lab with it, I think I turned it on below like a half a nit or something.
Yeah, cool, good. Vance asks, if you're calibrating a video wall, can all the TVs be calibrated at the same time if they're the same make and model? I think there are some programs out there like maybe Planar and NEC maybe that have kind of their own software and their own way they do it. Generally, when I do a video wall, and feel free, Tyler, share if you do it any differently, but I typically do one by one, of course, and what you have to do, let's say it's a 3x3 video wall, measure all of them, whichever one is kind of the weakest, if you will, as far as luminance goes, you calibrate the rest of them to that, white balance it, line up the colors, and then you're kind of good to go from there.
Yeah, I think maybe he's referring, can you just calibrate one and copy the settings? And you can't, because
yeah, you can't do that.
because if you just put them to their defaults in any picture mode and measure them, they're not going to measure the same.
Right.
So especially with a video wall, like maybe if it was like, hey, these are menus at a stadium on a reader board, and
Who cares, yeah.
they're not in one big array, then you could probably get away with that. They'll be close. But if they're all touching each other, it's really
No way.
critical that they're all the same.
Yeah,
They're all measuring the same.
That was Gerald, if you're still on. Your question was the one I was talking about. We'll contact you offline on that one, Gerald. It's more of a complicated kind of question, so no big deal. And then it looks like maybe the last one here. Chris says some 4K UHD Blu-rays are mastered with the max CLL of 1,000 nits, or 4,000 nits or 10,000 nits, which HDR10 value should we use on the pattern generator for display calibration on an OLED that supports 750 nits? So what I think he's talking about is when we were setting up the generator in that tab, and feel free to pull it back up again, those default values that are down at the bottom, right down there. So if you are using HDR10, exactly, there you go.
So it depends on the manufacturer. So for like LG, we do calibration with it bypassed, and we just turn the tone mapping back on. Now you can change it and change those values and see the tone curve change. Some displays ignore those values. I think Sony is one of them. They have their own dynamic tone mapping, and they just calculate everything, at least on their higher end ones, calculate the frame, the peak brightness of the frames in real time and adjust it. And LG has that dynamic tone mapping function. I think Samsung does as well, where they have enough horsepower in the TV to actually calculate. It's like generating your own dynamic metadata. It's like, what's the peak brightness of this frame or this scene? And we will slowly, change our tone curve based on that. It seems like more the mid-range to low range or projectors have more static tone curves. Now, if you can, on like, for example, the LG, turn off dynamic tone mapping and just have your own static curves, and they will look at the max CLL. But the problem is there is no standard to do this. Right. So each manufacturer is doing their own thing. And like, for example, LG allows you to actually change. If you've calibrated with Calman, then you can customize the HDR tone curves, at least in the 2019 TVs and the 2020 ones, where you can't change the shape of the roll-off, but you can change where it happens at. We've actually found that you would think that you would want, like, say you have 1,000 nit content, and you have a 700 nit TV, you would think you would want to follow the tone curve as much as possible and then roll off as least as possible. On paper, that sounds like what you do, but actually in practice, that just it doesn't look very good, and it looks like
everything, right?
Well, no, it more of like it doesn't dim everything, but it just like compresses the highlights so much that it looks like it's clipped.
Yeah.
And we've found that, for example, in post-production, when we're trying to match a X300 that's 1,000 nits, instead of rolling off, at like 70% of the peak brightness of the display, we've actually found that visually it looks better and closer to the X300 if you start the roll off earlier, like 350 nits, and have it be more gradual. Also, because the screen is bigger, it perceptually looks brighter. So even though the Sony is 1,000 nits, it doesn't look that much different. Like, it maybe looks like it's 10% brighter, not like 30% brighter, just because of how our perception works. Now, you do kind of get a punchier feel, but visually it just doesn't look like it's way brighter. So keep that in mind.
And it looks like there was one more that rolled in at the last second there from John. I think when we were talking about the profiling, he says, how does this compare to volumetric profiling that some other software companies have implemented?
I haven't tested that, but I don't know. This is what LG came up with as the solution, so that's what we're implementing.
Yeah, John, if we kind of flubbed the way you asked that question, go ahead and feel free to kind of maybe retype it in. Oh no, he says good, so that answered his question. Okay, cool, Tyler. Well, man, that was awesome. A lot of information. We could sit here for hours, you and I especially. So I think what we should do is plan on maybe doing like a part 2 next week, week after. I got to look at the schedule, but you and I will be in touch. We'll do a part 2 to this. For anybody who's been sitting on the webinar for the whole time, thank you so much for hanging out for all this time. We are going to get this up on YouTube in case some people had to drop off early. I totally understand that. If you guys have any other questions going forward, or maybe you think of something over the weekend, You guys can always reach out to me anytime, jason@avproglobal.com. And Tyler, what's a good way to get a hold of you if anybody has any specific questions, or get a hold of Portrait Displays maybe?
Yeah, so I pretty much am aware of all support questions, or if we have a contact form at the top of the website, if you have any specific things, then that will get passed to me if it's a technical question, or if you
Cool.
just email support question, say, hey, this is specifically for Tyler, then I will answer it.
Cool. Awesome, guys. Well, again, thank you so much. And everybody have a great weekend. It's a bit cloudy and gross here in Florida. I don't know how Seattle's looking. So hopefully the weather gets a little better over the weekend. I have,
Well, it's 65 and sunny, but everything's closed, so
yeah,
can't
true.
enjoy it.
You mentioned Ozark before. I finished it, season 3. I thought it was awesome. What'd you think?
I'm on season 1.
Oh, so you just started. Great. It's a good show. And then after that, I watched The Outsider on HBO, also with Jason Bateman. That was a really good show too. So this is a good time to knock these shows out I've been meaning to.
And if you haven't seen Tiger King, what are you doing with your
I,
life?
I'm right there with you, man. You know that big cat rescue in Tampa, that's about 7 minutes from a place I used to live at for many years. So I thought that was really cool when that came up. So again, thank you guys so much. Have a great weekend. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and stay tuned for the webinar schedule, and we'll do a follow-up to this next week or the week after. And yeah, we'll continue on and get the education out there and answer some of these questions for you guys. So thanks again, Tyler, for all your time today. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk to everybody next time.
Okay, thanks.
See ya.